APCD's planning section. And we have Jackie Mansour, our CEQA team lead here, and she's also a commenter for CEQA projects, and Vince Kirkuff, who's also a commenter from APCD. We want to welcome you all to APCD's CEQA training. We are recording this today, and our plan is to put the training up on the website, on our website, so that it's a resource for planners like yourself, for applicants, and for consultants. And since we have a lot to cover today, and we want to get to your questions, we'd like to forego, actual introductions of all of you, and instead have you enter in your name and affiliation into the chat section. And if you have questions during the 3 sections of our training today, could you please raise your hand, use a raise hand function, or go ahead and add your questions to the chat, and we'll work on getting those questions answered. So today's training is a deeper dive into the tools and resources and guidance that APCD is working on and has developed. And our intention is for these tools and resources to help you and applicants and developers develop defensible air quality and greenhouse gas assessments for new development. On our agenda today, let me just get to that. Jackie will be reviewing our new resources and tools we have on our land use and CEQA webpage. And we'll also be going over our 2021 interim CEQA GHG guidance. So those are things that we covered previously at our meetings with the jurisdictions, but just another refresh on that. And for those that are new to hear that for the first time. Next, we'll have Vince. He's going to be demonstrating CaliMod, the model that we use for estimating emissions of new land use development. And this model gives us both construction and operational phase emissions, and it breaks those emissions down into a day and quarter and annually. It also provides an opportunity for mitigation measures to be applied to the project to see the emission reductions that might happen from that. Okay, and then finally, Jackie's going to introduce a new worksheet that we have developed, and it's intended to help planners and applicants and consultants defensively answer the 4 air quality questions and 2 greenhouse gas questions that are in the environmental checklist. And here is that environmental checklist. And although it's a little fuzzy here in the picture, our hope is that after today, it's a lot more clear for everybody. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing and then hand it over to Jackie to introduce us to the new land use and CEQA CEQA page that we have on our website. Thank you.
Yeah, okay, great. Thanks, Andy. This is our new land use and CEQA webpage. You can get to it by going to slowcleanair.org, hovering over the rules and regulations tab, and then going down to land use and CEQA. And so the first thing you'll see is a link to CaliMod. This is where you can go and download CaliMod, the newest version, 2020.4. If you don't know what CaliMod is, that's okay. Vince is going to help explain that. So a bit of background on how this webpage was developed. In 2021, so earlier this year, the SLO County APCD created the following drop-down information guide, which captures the spirit of the 2012 CEQA Air Quality Handbook and the 2017 Clarification Memo, while also providing administrative clarity on the 2 documents. The information in the dropdown is divided into 3 sections, as you'll see here: general information, air quality, and greenhouse gases. The general information section includes references to air quality regulations, policies, and permit requirements, which apply to all development projects in SLO County, regardless of size or scope. The air quality section presents guidance for completing air quality impact analysis and mitigation for both the construction and operational phases of a project. We've also developed quick guides for construction and operational mitigation measures, which can be found in these following drop-down titles. And we're going to be going over those quick guides later on too. And then the greenhouse gas section provides guidance for the analysis and mitigation of greenhouse gas impacts and should be considered in conjunction with our latest guidance document, which is the Interim CEQA greenhouse gas guidance document. So diving into the general information section, the first tab explains SLO County APCD roles under CEQA. It has a definition for lead agencies, for responsible agencies. But then you'll see down here that it states that the SLO County APCD usually acts as a commenting agency. Comments are submitted to you all for your consideration. And you all do have the primary responsibility for determining what level of CEQA review is required for a project and for preparing and approving the environmental documents. In the guidance for land use decision section, the first thing it talks about is health risk from diesel particulate matter. So this is information, it states our position about sensitive receptors being developed near Highway 101 or railroads. And it states that non-sensitive uses and development such as commercial, parking lots and offices in which occupants are exposed to health risks for shorter duration are better suited to be nearest to Highway 101 and railroads because it does decrease the health risk. And so we're generally not supportive of sensory receptor development next to these sources. But should projects continue, we do recommend that to orient the sensitive receptor as far back as possible from the toxic source, which will directly reduce the cancer risk. Incorporate strategies stated in this following document, but we note here that implementing these strategies such as air filtration systems, sound walls, and vegetative barriers have not been proven to be as effective as moving a sensitive receptor farther from the toxic source. And then finally, we do suggest disclosing the potential health risks from US Highway 101 to the future sensitive receptors for informational purposes. And Andy is actually going to jump in right here and talk about this paragraph here.
Yeah, thank you, Jackie. And just to tie in a little bit with the toxics and equity, there have been some projects in the recent years that highlight the vital role that land use planning agencies play in long-term environmental and public health decisions. So an example, we did review a project that wanted to split a parcel and develop that project into two phases or under two phases. And the first phase was going to be a gas station, and both these parcels were right next to the 101. So one was going to have a gas station, and then the second phase was going to put in a affordable housing, and that affordable housing was intended to be close to the gas station itself, which would expose potentially lower income community members to a higher risk, health risk. So we also reviewed another project that wanted to site a senior health care facility next to Highway 101. And Highway 101 is a high volume roadway, which the state has identified as a toxic source. So we just want to let you know that APC's ability to preventatively address air quality inequities like these are limited to the statutes that are available. And on the APCD's planning side, when we see projects like these, we are pointing to guidance from CARB and from the California Air Resources Board and the federal EPA, which has these links here that Jackie's pointed to, that really help to or demonstrate that there's policy issues with citing those kind of residential land uses next to these toxic sources. So as planning, as the planning agency here, we are interested in working with your planning agencies to help address these land use issues and hopefully with updates to future policies or before policies are done, maybe through discretionary decisions.
Great, thanks, Andy.
Sure.
So moving right along, the next topic here is our position on infill within and outside urban and village reserve lines. So we're generally supportive of infill development, but we are generally not supportive of subdivision or lot splits outside URL and VRLs. And our CAP calls for these parcels to not be split below 20 acres in size, and instead promotes the concept of urban infill by directing growth to areas within the existing line boundaries, because mobile sources are the largest contributor to air pollution in our county, and rural parcel split projects just foster this continued dependency on private auto use. And next up is mixed use developments. So we're generally supportive of mixed use developments. However, as Andy was just mentioning, there are some land uses that could be problematic if mixed with residential quarters or very near residential land uses. So those are things like nail salons, dry cleaners, coffee roasters, gasoline stations, as we mentioned, furniture refurbishing and refinishing, any type of spray paint operation, and commercial wood cooking ovens and stoves. The next drop down talks about information for specific projects, and that information would be like constructing new schools, developing near schools, cannabis projects, and wineries. So if you have applications for any of these projects, it would be best to review this drop down and the specific information. The next drop down talks about permitting information and APCD rules, permits as they relate to ag burning, and construction permit requirements and what might need a construction permit requirement, operational permit requirements, and again, equipment and processes that might need a permit from the APCD. And Andy is actually going to jump in again and talk a little bit about a guide, another helpful guide.
Yeah, and just as a reminder, and maybe for those that joined late, we didn't do introductions, but if you have questions during our 3 sections, and we're in the first section right now of our presentation, please go ahead and raise your hand or put a question in the chat box for us. Okay, and back to the question at hand here with regards to permits and regulations. During one of our recent meetings with the jurisdictions, one of the jurisdictions had a request of us, and that was to work with them to develop a checklist of local, state, and federal air pollution rules and regs that could be given to applicants that they can complete and turn in. And that way, everybody's on the same page as regards to knowing what rules, federal rules or local rules might be that relate to air pollution that project might have. So APCD is currently working on a draft checklist, and we plan to present that to you at our next greenhouse gas stakeholder meeting in draft form for your review and some input and discussion at our September 9th greenhouse gas stakeholder meeting. So we're looking forward to presenting that to you all.
Awesome. So continuing on, this drop-down states information about nuisance and potential nuisance issues as they relate to equestrian facilities and fire pits. And then also rules, like our developmental burning rule, which prohibits developmental burning of vegetative material within our county. And then residential wood combustion rule, which states that residential wood burning devices such as wood or pellet stoves or inserts installed in new dwelling units today shall have particulate matter emission rates not exceeding 2 grams an hour and must be certified by the US EPA step 2. And then the next drop down talks about additional resources. This is kind of our catch-all for any resources where we think would be helpful to you throughout your environmental review process. And yeah, so we can jump into the air quality and greenhouse gas section. One important thing to note here is that the air quality section and the greenhouse gas section are, these drop downs will help you answer the questions from the Appendix G checklist. So you'll notice in the Appendix G checklist that there are 4 questions that you have to answer. And these 6 drop downs will help you answer those questions. And in the greenhouse gas section, there's 2 questions, and these 2 drop downs will help you answer those questions. So if you see question A asks you, does the project conflict with or obstruct implementation of the applicable air quality plan? And you'll see in this first drop down that it shows you how you would show a consistency analysis with SLO County APCD's Clean Air Plan for program level review. And something important to note here is that examples of projects and programs requiring a consistency analysis include general plan updates and amendments, specific plans, area plans, large residential developments, and large commercial or industrial developments. So if your project involves any of those things, you'd need to answer these 3 questions. And then essentially, if any of these questions are no, that your project is not consistent with these questions, then it would be not consistent with our Clean Air Plan. And so the next 4 drop downs here will help you answer questions B and C, because there's quite a bit of math needed in questions B and C. And the math comes from calculating construction emissions for project level review. And you'll notice it starts right off the bat by telling you that you need to use CaliMod to calculate those construction emissions. And Andy's going to jump in once more to talk about our historic Table 1-1.
Yeah, thank you, Jackie. So historically, we've had Table 1-1 in our CEQA handbook that created a screen. It was a screening table that enabled planners like yourself to look and see if a project was of a certain size, whether or not it was going to be above or below our threshold, which is a really handy tool in terms of streamlining your work. Unfortunately, today we have a couple of things that are making our Table 1-1 out of date. And one is that we just have a recent new update to CaliMod. So the criteria pollutants that we have in Table 1-1 are out of date. But also we no longer have a threshold for GHGs for a GHG threshold, because that threshold that we had, as we've mentioned before, was tied to AB 32. So because we don't have a GHG threshold, it's really not possible for us to update Table 1-1 at this time. Because even if we did update it, you're still going to have to run CaliMod to get the GHG emissions, and anyway, so that's the case. So at the most recent meeting that we had with you, we did note that greenhouse gas, that we could do a greenhouse gas update as part of a regional climate action plan update, and that we would talk with 3CE, the Central Coast Clean Energy, to see if they were interested in working with us on developing a regional cap update for all the jurisdictions in SLO County. We did speak with 3CE, and they've thought about it and said basically that it would be difficult for us to potentially do a regional cap and get everybody on the same page. So that's one concern that they had, but they also noted that within their work plans, they are committed to doing annual updates of greenhouse gas inventories for their member jurisdictions. But the regional cap is of interest to them, but it's not currently on their radar, on their near-term radar. So with that in mind, and recognizing that we don't have Table 1-1 because we don't have a greenhouse gas threshold, our thought is that it'd be important for us to move forward and develop a greenhouse gas threshold update that's consistent with SB 32 to help streamline CEQA. And so we have some thoughts on that, and we are going to present that to you again at our next greenhouse gas stakeholder meeting on September 9th.
Okay, great. So back to calculating construction emissions. You'll need to use CaliMod, and Vince is going to go over this. But essentially what you'll get out of CaliMod is a winter, summer, and annual report. You'll get the model files associated with the reports, and essentially what we'd like to see, if you make any changes to any SLO County defaults, they need to be identified, and a solid defensible explanation for those changes need to be provided to the SLO County APCD. One default that you might need to change based on your project is that CaliMod doesn't automatically calculate import or export offsite hauling trips and associated emissions. So if your project involves an unusual amount of importing or exporting soil, you might need to change that in CaliMod to reflect your project's actual emissions. So once you calculate your emissions using CaliMod, you then need to compare your emissions to our thresholds and apply mitigation. So here are our construction thresholds. These are the pollutants under our, these are the pollutants that have a construction threshold. And you compare your emissions to these thresholds, and then you see if any of them exceed the threshold. And if they do, you'll need to figure out what mitigation measures are going to be applicable to your project. And you can do this by going to our quick guide that we've developed for our construction mitigation measures. So I'm going to go to that really quick. So here's our quick guide. As you can see, the mitigation measures are laid out here on the left-hand side, and their applicability is on the right-hand side. So once you know your emissions and you know what thresholds you're breaching, you can go through this applicability list and see what mitigations might be needed for your project. And so, for example, this one right here says that you should use it if your project is greater than 4 acres and or within 1,000 feet of sensor receptor. So if that's true for your project, then you would need to use Fugitive Dust Mitigation Measures expanded list. And this blue text are all links within the document. So if you click on the link, it takes you right to the mitigation measure, and you can copy it into your environmental report. So something to note here is that this top table, or this first page, is really focused on our numerical thresholds, that table that I just showed you in the website. This second table is mitigation measures or special conditions to meet state and federal standards. So it's not necessarily dealing with a numerical, issue, but it's dealing with more of what your project involves. So for example, if your project's going to be demolishing or remodeling, you would need the proper abatement of asbestos containing material mitigation measure for your project. So jumping back to the website, the operational section, or calculating operational emissions, is very much the same as construction. The first thing it says to do is use CaliMod. The things that the APCD would be looking for are also the same: a winter, summer, and annual report, the model files associated with the reports, and changes to any SLO County defaults just need to be identified and explained. Some of the defaults within the operational section that you might need to consider changing would be the trip length. So for projects that are located in rural areas of the county where commercial services are not readily available, the trip length values in the operational section of CaliMod should be set at 13 miles for all trip distances. And then another thing to note would be your fleet mix. So if your project's a little bit more on the large commercial, retail, or heavy on-road truck, like an industrial project, and it's attracting a lot of heavy on-road truck use, you might need to change the defaults within CaliMod there, because CaliMod's defaulted to something more not using on-road truck use. And then so once you get your operational emissions, you need to compare them to our thresholds again. This is our operational threshold table. And once you compare them to the thresholds, you'll need to figure out what mitigation measures are needed. And we have an operational mitigation measure quick guide. So I'm going to go there. And the format of this is the same. The mitigation measures are on the left, the applicability is on the right. And it's the same process. You would just go through this list and see if any of them apply to your project. And if they do, you would just click on the blue text and see what mitigation measure you need to implement. And the same thing is true for the operational mitigation measure guide. This top table is really dealing with our numerical thresholds versus this bottom table is more mitigation measures or special conditions to meet state and federal standards. So going back to the website, the last drop down here talks about determining odor significance. And you'll notice in the checklist, that is the last question. Does the project result in any emissions, such as those leading to odors, adversely affecting a substantial number of people? So this dropdown will help you answer this question. And essentially what you're doing is figuring out if your project is within any of the screening distances to any of these operations. And if they are, then the compliance division at here it's the APCD would need to be contacted, and the SLO county or the compliance division would review the inventory of odor complaints for the nearest odor emitting facilities during the previous 3 years to figure out if there's really going to be an issue. All right, so that was the end of the air quality section.
You listening to this?
So jumping to the greenhouse, I think someone might need to put themselves on mute, maybe, if that's possible. Thank you. So diving into the greenhouse gas section, calculating greenhouse gas emissions are, the same process for the construction and same process for the operational and same for greenhouse gases. You need to use CaliMod. This has a lot of good information about amortizing construction emissions, which we're going to go over later. And the same information is needed from CaliMod: a winter, summer, and annual report, the model files associated with the reports, changes to any of the defaults. There's quite a bit of defaults that may need to be changed to get your most accurate greenhouse gas emissions for your project. And most notably right now is that CaliMod currently doesn't have energy intensity factors for the Central Coast Community Energy utility company. We do have that information available though, and we will post that to our website very soon, but just noting that that might, or it will change your greenhouse gas emission results. And so you're going to need to manually put in the energy intensity factors for 3CE currently. And has some other defaults that you may not want to review as well. So again, the process is the same. Once you have your greenhouse gas emissions, you'll need to compare them to thresholds and apply mitigation. So this situation is a little bit different. As Andy was explaining, we don't have a greenhouse gas threshold, and our 2021 interim CEQA greenhouse gas guidance document is the best place to look for what to do about that. And it's actually easier for me to explain the guidance document in a PowerPoint. So I'm gonna switch gears for a second and share a different screen.
This is Darcy. Can I ask a quick question?
Sure.
So I might have missed it in the beginning of the presentation, but I'm a little confused on when we know that we've reached the threshold to require an air quality analysis by a consultant. So it seems like all this streamlining, we're able to, the planner can go through and determine, if any mitigation is necessary, but it seemed like you've eliminated the need for a air quality study. So with the old table 1-1 in the handbook, it seemed like if you went over the threshold, then you asked for, the applicant to provide an air quality study. Did I miss something?
Yeah, Andy explained that a little bit and how our historic table 1-1 is out of date right now. I don't know, Andy, if you want to briefly just summarize what you said.
Sure. So, Darcy, it's a good question. Ultimately, where we are at today is without that table. It is a little bit more difficult to, streamline things and say it's going to be below the threshold. So, really, the projects are going to need to have a CaliMod run to see where they are relative to the thresholds themselves instead of relying on the table. And our goal is to, be able to update our CEQA threshold for greenhouse gases and then redo the table so that we have, another CEQA streamlining tool down the road for both the criteria pollutant side as well as the greenhouse gas side. Is that answering your question?
Not quite, but just because when we went through the exercise of showing so if you have and are over the threshold in this category, here's your mitigation measures. Mm-hmm. It seems like if you're over, when you're over the threshold by a lot, it just seems like we would want to hear from have an air quality study and not just, the planners aren't experts in this. So it just seems like at some point we need more of an expert opinion on what the mitigation really should be.
Yeah, I think what you can do is if you were to build the project that you have in CaliMod as a planner and run it using the defaults, which Vince is going to go over with you. And it's a pretty simple thing to just build a project and run it through the defaults. And if those defaults show that the project is going to be over some thresholds, then it's up to your agency if you want to get into an actual air quality assessment from a consultant to evaluate it, or if you think you can use the tools that we have available to you on the web page here to specify the mitigation measures that would bring the project to or mitigate the project impacts.
Got it. Okay, that helps.
Okay, great, thanks.
Okay, so we're on the greenhouse gas side, and I'm going to talk about our interim guidance document. And so it's a 6-page memo, which was released earlier this year. And the format focuses on answering the 2 questions, which I've already gone over, questions A and B. We did have multiple feedback sessions with you all and the AEP Climate Change Committee when developing this guidance. And so for the first question A, does the project generate greenhouse gas emissions either directly or indirectly that may have significant impact on the environment? And so you used to be able to answer this question by comparing your emissions to our thresholds, these 2 in the middle here. But these thresholds were based on a bright line in service, or they are the bright line in service population thresholds, and they're based on a gap analysis and substantial evidence and consistent with AB 32 and CARB's 2008 scoping plan. And that is currently problematic. And what this court case really brought to light those problems. So AB 32 based thresholds derived from that gap analysis are invalid for projects with a planning horizon beyond 2020 because AB 32 has a goal of reducing greenhouse gas emissions to 1990 levels by 2020, and now we're beyond that. We're in 2021, so we needed we need to base our thresholds off of SB 32, which is reduce greenhouse gas emissions to 40% below 1990 levels by 2030. So we have a new goal, and so that means we need new thresholds. So in the absence of a threshold, we do outline three methods for comparing your project, or three methods of thresholds. So you can still be consistent with a qualified climate action plan as outlined by these CEQA guidelines. Unfortunately, SLO City is the only city that has a qualified climate action plan currently. You can have no net increase in greenhouse gas emissions, and the California 2017 scoping plan states no net increase is an appropriate overall objective on page 101 and gives a few projects examples of where they used no net increase. And then, or you can have lead agency adopted defensible greenhouse gas thresholds. And there seems to be two approaches emerging of best management practices. SAC Metro really highlighted that you can do a best management practice approach, or you can just update your, our traditional bright line and efficiency thresholds. And as Andy mentioned earlier, we are working on moving forward with updating our thresholds. So once you have the appropriate threshold for your project and there's mitigation or impacts to mitigate, in our guidance, we have a hierarchy for mitigating those impacts. So it's kind of a start local and go abroad approach. So the first thing you would do would be to implement all on-site greenhouse gas reduction measures, and then move on to SLO County offsite and offsets, which could be implementation of things like of local offset concepts like climate forward or carbon farm plans, or California offsets like through the American Carbon Registry or Climate Action Reserve or VERA. And then North American offsets would be the next option, and then international offsets. And just a note here that all of these offsets need to be consistent with CARB registry or equivalent, plus be real, additional, quantifiable, permanent, verifiable, and enforceable. So moving quickly to question B, does the project conflict with an applicable plan, policy, or regulation adopted for the purpose of reducing the emissions of greenhouse gases? The plans, policies, or regulations to consider as outlined in our guidance would be climate action plans. And that would be climate action plans that are qualified or not. So all of your current climate action plans should be compared to your project. Your project should be compared to SLOCOG's RTP and SCS. Specifically, we point out that they should show consistency with the land use and transportation policies, goals, action strategies, and preferred growth scenarios. And then finally, CARB's 2017 scoping plan. And all applicable components within the scoping plan should be evaluated for consistency. But we do specifically call out that your project should be consistent with the 15% VMT reduction to show consistency with the state's climate goals. And just to note here that this 15% VMT shouldn't be confused with the SB 743 evaluation needed in the transportation section of project CEQA evaluation. So that's the end there of the greenhouse gas section, and we are finished talking about the website. So I'm going to next move to introducing our hypothetical project before Vince starts to talk about CaliMod. So let me just share that appropriate screen again.
And Jackie, before we move on, maybe we can open up to a few questions if there are some questions on that section 1 that we just finished. Or we do have a question and answer session at the end as well that we're hoping to be able to cover questions that you might have as well. And I would point out one thing, following up on that, the question from Darcy, one thing that we are planning on doing as well as the training we are doing today with you is actually reaching out to consultants as well. So we will plan on having a training for the consultants, going over all of this with them as well, and probably in a lot more detail on how to actually use our local website tool and run the projects through CaliMod and through our worksheet that we're going to go over here next.
Yeah, so we've developed a hypothetical project, and here it is. So an applicant wants to develop an 18.5 acre property in Los Esos, and the approximate latitude and longitude of the parcels are stated here. There is one existing structure on the property that will be demolished, and the project is scheduled to start on January 3rd, 2023 and be operational in 2024. Over 5 acres will be graded, and the property is adjacent to residential dwellings, as you can see in this image. And the project will include the following land uses. So it'll have an office building, daycare center, parking lot, 2 fast food restaurants without drive-throughs, and a residential townhouse. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen, and Vince is going to walk us through on how to input that project into CaliMod.
Okay, thanks. Let me get the CaliMod up here. Okay, so I just want to stress that this isn't intended to be a comprehensive instruction lesson about how to use CaliMod, but more just a brief overview, a quick demonstration of how easy it is to use CaliMod to get estimated emissions and to determine if a project, in this case our example mixed-use project, is going to exceed any thresholds. For a basic project, CaliMod is very user-friendly, and so we don't want you to be afraid of it. Also, I just want to mention that CaliMod app is available at calimod.com, and plans are in the works to move the app to a web-based platform. But for now, you got to get it installed on your computer. And once you do, the startup screen looks like this. And the first screen that you see when you start a new project is this project characteristics screen. And you only need to fill in the name of the project, its location, the forecasting zone, and the utility company. And the program does the rest. It'll look like this once it's filled in. There's a couple of things to be careful of on this page. One is that your construction start date, that has to just make sense for your project, and that the operational year has to be after the calculated construction period after that start date. Also, down here, you have to make sure that the safe vehicle rule box is checked. According to the California Air Resources Board website, federal actions in the past 2 years have attempted to undermine the GHG standards and California's requirements for zero emission vehicles. And that has required some changes to the model. So while that rule is being challenged in court and the current administration is working to change it, at least for now, we have to keep that box checked. So as you click the next button down here on each page, you'll be moving through the various phases of the project, which are represented by the tabs across the top of the page. So the next one after project characteristics is going to be land use. Now, in the interest of time, we're not going to go through all the phases. And for many, if not most projects, you can simply use the default values for the construction, operational, and vegetation tabs. So this is what the land use tab will look like when it's filled in for our mixed use project. And I just want to point out this is a PowerPoint screenshot, but if we were looking at the live program, what you would see right in here is a drop-down menu for the land use type and the land use subtype. So you basically just build your project here from the project description that we have. You fill in the first 3 columns, and this unit amount here will be based on the size metric. The size metric, as well as the lot acreage, the square feet, and the population, is all given to you by the program. However, these defaults, like all of the defaults throughout the program, can be changed if needed to more closely match your project conditions. And anytime you change a default value, then you have to enter a brief explanation of why the change was made down here in the remarks section. The construction and the operational tabs contain all the parameters which the project emission calculates, or which the model uses to calculate the project emissions. And as I mentioned, if your project has some unusual aspects, then you may need to make adjustments to these, but the default value works for most projects. So after the reports are run, if the project has excess emissions, then adjustments and reductions can be made under the mitigation tab. For now, we will just jump to the report section. And on the report screen, you have your choice of 5 different reports. The 2 that we're really interested in are the annual report and the winter report. Once you've chosen your report type, then you just click this green button to run the report. The annual report obviously gives us the annual emissions, but it also provides quarterly figures. And the winter report provides daily emissions because the winter numbers are typically higher than the summer, which gives us a conservative worst case scenario. So when you get your annual report, it will look something like this. These reports are typically 30 some odd pages long, but all the emissions information that we need to determine if the project is above or below the threshold is on the first few pages in sections 2.1 and 2.2. The rest of the report gives a lot of detailed information, breaking the data down by pollutant, by source, by land use, and by construction phase. Here's page 2, which gives a summary of the estimated emissions for each year of construction. So this construction is going to go out for 2023 and 2024. And we're basically concerned with 4 types of emissions represented here with these 5 highlighted columns of emissions. We look at the ROG and the NOx. We total the ROG and NOx together and count that as one emission. So basically we have the ROG and NOx. We have the fugitive PM, which is dust, construction dust. We have the exhaust 2.5 or PM 2.5, which is diesel exhaust. And then we have the CO2e, which is the GHGs. And on the bottom line of this table, this shows the maximum, that is the highest 1-year emission level for each pollutant. The table right below shows the mitigated values. So if mitigation measures had been employed in the model, then these values would reflect the appropriate reductions. The last table of figure, or the last table of section 2.1 is on the next page, the top of this page. And this is a summary of the construction ROG plus NOx emissions by quarter. Again, it has the maximum quarterly value noted on the bottom line. So in this case, the construction is going to go out over 5 quarters, and it calculates out what the emissions are for each quarter. The following section, section 2.2, gives similar information for the operational phase of the project. Again, we're only concerned with these 5 columns, with these 4 pollutants: the ROG plus NOx, the fugitive PM, fugitive PM or PM10, PM2.5 or exhaust 2.5, and the CO2e. And also, if mitigations were employed, that would show up on the following table. So there would be a table, or there actually is a table right below the unmitigated operational that will show the mitigation. So now we'll jump over to the winter report. And we're starting here on page 2, again with section 2.1. And this time this shows the highest daily construction emissions. So it's important to note that these emissions, the daily emissions, are in pounds per day, where the annual figures were shown in tons per year. This table shows the highest single day emissions for each calendar year of construction. And then the bottom line here highlights the maximum numbers. Similar to the annual report, here is section 2.2 of the winter report, with the maximum daily operation emissions for each pollutant broken down by source. So that's basically it. These 2 reports and a few tables in each report it give us all the emission estimates that we need to determine if the project exceeds the thresholds. Our next step would be to take this information and Jackie will take us through a step-by-step analysis of this project. If there's any questions, we do have a few minutes to take questions.
We did get a question in, Vince, from Steve McMasters. Steve, you want to ask your question?
Maybe find the unmute button, Andy.
There you go. You got it.
So a quick question was, in dealing with, for instance, use permits, a lot of times we do not have a anticipated start date of construction. Either there really isn't one, or there's one that someone wants to start as soon as possible, which means whenever they get done with the process, which is unknown at that point. So what would a project manager do in that case where we really don't have a realistic estimated start date of construction?
Well, Steve, I think one thing that we can say is that just make your best guess as to when the project might start. And ultimately, if you were to say, okay, theoretically this project could start, breaking ground in a year and be done a year later. And if the reality is that that's going to end up being 3 years and 4 years down the road, if you were to actually run that model, like I said before, at 1 year from now, and then start, actually operational at the end of that year, when you run that model, it's going to the emission factors within the model itself are more conservative than if you were to have run it, 3 years out. So by running it, maybe a little earlier than what might actually take place, you're being conservative. The results will be conservative and defensible. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Okay. So I guess one thing I would point out is, you know, we have run this model quite a bit, and what we find is that if you have a project description, you can take a look at that project description and build it in CaliMod very rapidly and run it in the basic mode here to get the annual and winter emissions. So it can be, you know, you can do that in a very short amount of time. So, and then save those files out and then compare those, as Jackie's going to show you, with this worksheet that we've developed to help you all determine whether or not the projects are impactful on air quality and greenhouse gas side. So want to open up for any other questions you guys might have on section 1 or Vince's section on CaliMod before we jump into Jackie's review of this new worksheet that we have.
Hey, Andy, this is Shawnee here from the county.
Hi, Shawnee.
Hi. I just have a simple question. I know this is a demo case study.
Mm-hmm.
I was wondering, you know, as you were going through and showing us the pages of the report, there's one table that says unmitigated, and then there's the numbers, you know, and then you have the other table that says mitigated. So I noticed the numbers are the same.
Yes.
So what does that mean for a reader?
Yeah, for a reader. So basically what that means is Shawnee, you ran the model in this just simple basic mode without applying any mitigation to it. So you can do that to begin with to see where you are relative to the thresholds. And if the project is over the thresholds, then you can go back into the model and open up the mitigation tabs and look at potential mitigations that you could apply to the project, and then rerun the model, and you will see differences from the unmitigated and mitigated numbers then.
Oh, so we have to choose the type of mitigations if we exceeds the threshold, and then we rerun the model.
Yes, correct.
I got
And
you.
I want to just point out that the model currently has a limited amount of mitigation measures that are within it. But as we transition to the web version of this model, one of the things that CAPCOA is doing, and CAPCOA is all the air districts throughout the state of California, that planning group is working on an update to the greenhouse gas mitigation document that was done in 2010. So the intention with that update is to infuse a lot of that updated information into the new CaliMod. So right now, although there's not a lot of mitigation, as we move forward with the web version, we're anticipating seeing a lot more quantitative mitigation measures within the model. Any other questions? Okay, if not, we'll turn it over to Jackie for the new worksheet.
Okay, yeah. So I have the worksheet open here, and I have what Vince just showed you, which were the reports on the right-hand side. And just before we begin, this activity worksheet is really focused on doing the math side of the air quality and greenhouse gas analysis, you know, formulating your arguments and concluding significance and writing your paragraphs. That's really something that we're leaving up to you. But this is will be a good introduction on how to do the math. And this is a hypothetical project, so it's not meant to be entirely realistic. So don't think about this project too literally. We'll go over portions of the activity. We're not going to get through certain portions just to save some time. And with that, let's get started. So this activity is broken down into the questions that you have to answer on AEP's appendix checklist. So the first question asks you, does the project conflict with or obstruct implementation of the applicable air quality plan? And so this green text here is the website drop-down title. We've already been over that. That will help you answer this question. So if you need additional help, that drop-down is available to you. But let's just start with number 1. It says, according to the APCD's Land Use and CEQA website, will this project need to be compared to the APCD's Clean Air Plan? And it can either be A or B. Yes, because it's a general plan update or amendment, specific plan, area plan, or large residential development or large commercial or industrial development. Or no, because it's a relatively small project. And so, not to start off on the wrong foot, but this project, I'm going to give you the answer. It's B. No, because it's a relatively small project. We're still very much working on guidance, better guidance on how to compare your project to our Clean Air Plan, and also really further defining what exactly large residential development really means, so that you can really easily determine, you know, do I need to answer this question A, or can I just say that actually this is a relatively small project and I don't need to compare my project to the CAP. So moving on, we already answered the first question, which is great. Now we're on to question B. So does the project result in a cumulatively considerable net increase of any criteria pollutant for which the project region is non-attainment under an applicable federal or state ambient air quality standard? So that's a mouthful. So we're going to try to break that down a little bit. This website drop-down title for these first questions is what you can use to help you out. But we're really talking about here is criteria pollutants. And there's, you know, a number of criteria pollutants, but that, as Vince was saying, we're only focusing on a few. And then it's really criteria pollutants that are non-attainment in our county. And so this italicized text here says that SLO County has a non-attainment status for ozone and respirable particulate matter, according to California ambient air quality standards, and a non-attainment status for ozone in eastern SLO County, according to federal ambient air quality standards. So that means we're only narrowing it down to a few pollutants. So CaliMod is needed to answer questions 2 through 5, but we've already run our reports. And we're focusing on the pollutants of ROG NOx because they are precursors to ozone. And remember, we are non-attainment status for ozone, and fugitive particulate matter, PM10, because, you know, we are also non-attainment for that. So it says here that daily emission values can be found in the summer and winter reports. However, the APCD relies on winter emission values, as this assumes the worst case scenario. And then, like Vince was mentioning, quarter emission values can be found or calculated from the annual report. And so these questions 2 through 5 are really just breaking down the math. So the first question asks, the ROG NOx daily emission value for this project is, and it says tip, the ROG value is what, plus the NOx value equals the answer to this question. So because I'm looking for daily emission values, and it says here that daily emission values can be found in the summer and winter reports, I'm going to go to my winter report. And since we're talking about construction emissions, I'm going to go down to the construction section and look for my first pollutant of concern, which is the ROG value. So I'm looking for the highest construction ROG value. So it looks like here that in 2024, the ROG value would be 138.0899. So I'm just going to type that in really quickly. 138.0899. And then I'm going to find my NOx value, which it looks like the highest day was in 2023, and that was 27.5669. So I'm going to enter that in quickly. 27. Sorry, I just messed up. Even for us, it's a little complicated. So we're looking for the highest day of emissions. So that means that it looks like the highest day was in 2024, because if we quickly just add in our head, the ROG NOx together, those emissions are highest in this day in 2024. So the value that I'm going to put in there is 14.2996. And then you can add those values together and get the answer to this question, which is 152.3895. And you would enter that in here also. So, and then moving on to question 3, the highest quarter amount of ROG NOx emissions for this project are, and since we're looking for quarter amounts, and it says here that quarter amounts can be found or calculated from the annual report, I'm going to go to my annual report. And since we're at the construction side, and we're going to go to our pollutant of concern, which is ROG NOx. And if you remember, Vince showed us this handy table at the end of section 2.1, which shows us that our highest quarter amount of ROG NOx is recorded here, which is 1.6553. I'll put that in really quick. And again, it says here, tip, it tells you where to find it. So moving on to question 4, the average quarter amount of fugitive particulate matter emissions for this project is, and again, it gives you a tip, just a helpful equation to figure out this answer. So the first thing we need to find is our annual fugitive PM10 value. So since we want annual emissions, we're going to go to our annual report, and we're still on our construction side. So we're going to go up a little bit, back to our unmitigated construction table, go to our fugitive PM10 value, and it shows here that it was highest in 2023 at 0.2594. So I'm going to put that in. And because we're trying to find the average quarter amount of fugitive particulate matter emissions, we need to divide it by 4 because there's 4 quarters in a year. So I've already done that math for us, and our value is going to be 0.06485. And there is a part 2 to this question. It asks us, how big is the grading area for this project? We actually don't need to use CaliMod for this because it was given to us in the project description. If you remember, there is over 5 acres that will be graded. So I'm just going to put that in here. So you can see that it's kind of just simple. Once you know where to find the information, it is just simple adding or division to figure out your answers, or it's just stated right there in the report for you. So once you have your emission values, you're going to compare them to our thresholds. And there's these threshold tables already outlined for you. So it says, use your answers from questions 2 through 4 to fill in the tables below to determine if this project exceeds our construction thresholds. So helpful hint here, we want our ROG NOx daily emissions, but we've already figured that out. It's our answer from question 2. And our answer from question 2 is 152.3895. So I'm going to put that in here. And then you just ask yourself, is this over 137 pounds? Yes, it is over 137 pounds. So you know that one of our thresholds were exceeded based on this project. And you just keep going. So this is asking you your max or average quarter emissions, which is the answer from question 3, which is 1.6553. And you ask yourself, is that over 2.5 tons? No, it's not. And it's definitely not over our tier 2 threshold, which is 6.3 tons. And then next we want to figure out our fugitive particulate matter and compare that to our thresholds. So we've already done that. It's the answer from question 4, which is 0.06485. You compare that to the threshold and it is not over the threshold. And so there's additional questions that you need to ask here. So any project with a grading area greater than 4 acres of worked area can exceed the 2.5 ton PM10 quarterly threshold. So we've asked ourselves already, what is the grading area for this project? And we found in the project description that was 5 acres. So yes, this project will exceed the PM10 quarterly threshold based off of the grading information. And now that we have our emissions, we compared them to our thresholds, we can use our construction mitigation measure quick guide to figure out what mitigation measures are appropriate for this project. So I'm going to go to our quick guide. And so, like I said, you just run through this applicability list and see if any of the mitigation measures are needed. So if you remember, I used this as the project example, and it says, use if the project is greater than 4 acres and or within 1,000 feet of a sensor receptor. And we know that we have a grading area greater than 4 acres. So that means that we're gonna need the fugitive dust expanded list mitigation measure. And then we're also going to need, because we saw that we are over our daily emission threshold for ROG and NOx. So we got to go through this list and figure out where it says that. And I'm just going to help you out. It says right here that if a project meets any of the following, and our project does, it does exceed the ROG NOx daily threshold. So that means that we need standard mitigation measures for construction equipment. And as you do this more and more, it will get faster and you'll start to, memorize a little bit what's needed, and it gets, easier to do.
Yeah, and just one point here is on the quick guide there, you can just click on those, that link to the standard mitigation measures, and it takes you right to the language that you can then drop into your conditions.
Yeah. So that was all on the construction side. So you would do the same process for the operational side. This is obviously already filled out for you. In the interest of time, we're not going to do this part of this activity, but the process is the same. It's some, 4 simple questions to ask yourself, some addition to add up some values. You compare them to the thresholds using our tables, and you determine what mitigation measures are needed using the operational quick guide. So we're going to jump to question C. That was all we needed to do for question B in terms of the math portion. So question C asks us, does the project expose sensitive receptors to substantial pollutant concentrations? So we're not really worried about criteria pollutants here because we've already examined those in question B. But there are other pollutants that aren't criteria pollutants that need to be examined. So this says that CALIMOD is needed to answer questions 14 through 16 regarding DPM 2.5, which is a toxic air contaminant for construction emissions. Daily emission values can be found in the summer and winter reports. However, we rely on the winter emission values, as this assumes worst case scenario, and the quarter emission values can be calculated from the annual report. So there's 2 questions here. And remember, we're just dealing with diesel particulate matter. So the diesel DPM 2.5 daily emissions for this project are, and it gives a helpful tip. Not sure why, but CALIMOD labels DPM 2.5 as exhaust PM 2.5. So that's what we're looking for. And since we need to figure out daily emissions, we're going to go to our winter report. And so we're on the construction side of things right now. And Vince highlighted the pollutants of concern. So right here it says exhaust PM 2.5. And so we're looking for our daily emissions for this project. And it looks like they were highest in 2023 at 1.1655. So I'm going to put that in quickly. 1.1655. And then we need to figure out the average quarter amount of diesel DPM 2.5 emissions for this project. So we're looking for quarter amounts. So we look in the annual report, and we're on the construction side. So it's actually already up. And it looks like the highest emissions were in 2023 at 0.0918. And the same thing for this calculating the quarter amounts. So we find our annual amount and we divide it by 4 quarters. So that was 0.0918 divided by 4 quarters gives us 0.02295. And the same process. We have these helpful tables. You just pull down the information. So your answer from question 14 was 1.1655, which is definitely not over our 7 pounds per day threshold. So no. And same thing for this. Our answer from question 15 can be used compared to our average quarter or quarterly tier 1 threshold, which was 0.02295. And that's definitely not over. And it's definitely not over our tier 2 threshold. So this is, you know, as you can see, a relatively smaller project. So far, we've exceeded 1 construction threshold. And if we would have ran through the operational side, we would have barely exceeded an operational threshold as well.
Hey, Jackie, before you go on, one quick point here with regards to the quarterly numbers. Can you pull down in the report to the summary of the quarterly emissions? So one thing I want to point out is that this one, the current CaliMod version only gives you quarterly emissions for ROD plus NOx. We have requested that when they do the update for the web-based version, there's going to be both the ozone precursors as well as the PM and the diesel PM in here too. And it's actually going to be more accurate than what it is if you just divide it by 4 on the annual numbers, because it's actually looking at the a running average quarter to see which ones are higher. So it'll be a more accurate evaluation and easier for you to determine what the quarterly impacts are when the new versions comes out.
Yeah, okay. So we've calculated our emissions, compared them to our thresholds, and we're moving on to some additional questions that are actually really important to answer, and they actually apply to any project regardless of the size or scope. So if anything, you should really be paying attention to questions 17 through 19. So this project asks you, or this question asks you, will this project be demolishing or remodeling? And we know in the project description that it said that an existing structure will be demolished. So yes, we will be demolishing. So we would need proper abatement of asbestos containing material mitigation measure, and the APCD compliance division should be contacted. And then question 18 asks us, will this project be demolishing, remodeling, sandblasting, or removing paint with a heat gun? And we know, yes, it's going to be demolishing. So we're going to need proper abatement of lead-based coated structures mitigation measures. and the APCD Compliance Division should be contacted. And is this project site within 1 mile of a known serpentine deposit? So this question, is all about the location of the project. And we actually have a link to our Noaa map in our mitigation measure quick guide. So as you recall, this top table is numerical thresholds, and this bottom table is really what we're examining right now, because all of these 17 through 19 are special conditions or mitigation measures to meet state and federal standards. So here's the link to our Noaa map. I'm not going to go to it right now, but I do have a screenshot of what it would look like. So there's our project in Los Osos. And if you use just Google Tools, you can see that this is over a mile away. This is our, the green kind of line here is our Noaa buffer. So the answer to this would be no, this project is not within 1 mile of a known serpentine deposit. So then we can use our construction mitigation measure quick guide, which I was just on, to determine what mitigation measures are needed. So we know that this, on the diesel side, we're not over any of the thresholds. So really we don't need to worry too much about that, but we do know that the project is demolishing a structure. So the 2 mitigation measures that we're going to need are stated here or stated here. Proper abatement of lead, proper abatement of ACM, and then proper abatement of lead-based coated structures. All right, so we're done with the construction phase for question C. And again, the process would be the same on the operational side, same, basic questions to ask, compare them to our operational thresholds, and then a couple additional questions to ask yourself, and then determining what mitigation measures are needed. And that's really the end of question C. And just moving on quickly to question D, does the project result in any other emissions, such as those leading to odors, adversely affecting a substantial number of people? So as I explained on the website, that last drop down is going to help you answer that. I'm not going to jump back to it really quickly, but I do have a screenshot of those project screening distances. So again, this question is based off your project location, and if any of these operations are within any of these screening distances. So it's just, using Google, using your resources, knowing what's around the project to determine if there really is going to be an odor problem. And so for this analysis, I'm just going to give you the answer. There isn't any of these operations within the screening distances. And that's the end of the air quality section. So it's 4:26, so we're doing great on time. I'm just gonna go through the greenhouse gas section quickly.
Jackie, can I ask a quick question on odors for all us cannabis folks? I know this is a totally different project, but have you guys at all considered cannabis projects and odors when you've gone through this checklist? And if so, could we maybe regroup on that some other time?
Yeah, sure. So that's an interesting question. So we do have jurisdiction, I believe, over odors that come from the manufacturing and processing of cannabis, but not the agricultural growing of cannabis.
Okay.
So I don't know if that changes, your question or what you asking about, but it is a little bit different.
Right. I just the CEQA checklist is kind of subjective. I think, one of the questions is, does it subject a significant number of people or something like that to objectionable odors, which is, what constitutes a significant number of people? If there's any information on that, it'd be helpful.
Yeah, okay.
And
That's a,
yeah.
Oh yeah. I was going to say that's a good question, and that's something that we could possibly look into, defining those terms a little bit better.
Great, thanks.
Is there any more questions before I go to the greenhouse gas section? So the greenhouse gas section is compared to the air quality section, it's a little less straightforward, specifically more right now, obviously, on comparing your emissions to thresholds and applying mitigation. Calculating greenhouse gases using CaliMod is actually pretty easy to do. And so we can get started with that. That's what you would need to do for answering question A. Does the project generate greenhouse gas emissions either directly or indirectly that may have a significant impact on the environment? So question 27, the total construction CO2e value for this project is, it gives you a tip here that since we are constructing over a 2-year period, we would need 2 different values, one for 2023, one for 24, and adding them together. And since I'm looking for annual amounts, I'm going to go to my annual report. And actually, the greenhouse gas section only deals with the annual report. So that's kind of nice. You only have to deal with one report. So if we go to our unmitigated construction table, we see here on the very last column on the right-hand side that our value in 2023 is 412.2796, and our value in 2024 is 58.1987. And it adds them up here. So I'm just going to type in that total value to save a little bit of time. So that would be 412.2796.
Hey, actually, Jackie, that last line there is, instead of a total, it's a maximum.
Oh, right. Good catch. See, I told you this is hard for even us. It's a lot of numbers. So 2023 value was 412.2796. And then our value in 2024 was 58.1987, and we would add those up to get our total construction value for this whole project, which is 470.4783. So we know our construction amounts, and now we need to figure out the construction annual CO2 value amortized over the life of the project. So amortized just means, spread out throughout the life of the project. And it says tip here, the total construction greenhouse gas emissions should be amortized over the life of the project, and residential and mixed use projects have a lifetime of 30 years. So further tip, kind of a simple calculation, your total construction CO2e value was 470.4783 divided by 30 years gives us a value of 15.6826. And so now we have our amortized construction value, and now we need to find the total construction and operational annual CO2e value. So that takes a little bit more math. The amortized construction CO2e value should be added to the annual operational value. So that amortized construction value was 15.6826. And now we need to go back to our CaliMod report to figure out what our total operational value is. So I'm going to go to my annual report, go down to the operational section, and that value was 1669.5518. So I'm going to put that in here. 1669.5518. And then you just add those up and you get 1685.23. And there's just a note here that, so this is the total construction and operational GHG emissions per year, but the total project emissions should be mitigated over the life of the project. So if our project life is 30 years, that means we essentially have greenhouse gas emissions of this value times 30 years. And, you know, when you figure out your threshold and you figure out what needs to be mitigated, it should be mitigated over the life of the project.
Yeah, let me just step in real quick before you move on to that. And if you could you scroll back to that section. One point I'd like to make here, or we'd like to make here, is that you know, that one value that we have for the operational phase, the reality is that over time, as the vehicles clean up, as the grid cleans up, 3CE numbers clean up, there's going to be less emissions over time. So it may behoove the project proponent to take a look at CaliMod runs, you know, from today and then further out, and then tally up those values over the time frame of the project to get a more realistic number associated with the actual impact each year, because they will clean up every year over time.
Right. So we're on the second to last page, sorry. So we have our emission values, and now we need to compare them to our thresholds and apply mitigation and analyze. This is the drop down that will help you, answer this question. So, and this is the italicized, text that gives you the tips. So the SLO County APCD's 2021 Interim CEQA Greenhouse Gas Guidance document should be used to answer the following questions. And just noting here that, as we've said, we don't have a bright line threshold anymore or an efficiency threshold, because they were based on AB 32 and now we're beyond 2020. So this is a more theoretical approach to answering these questions, just kind of using the interim greenhouse gas guidance document and figuring out what would be applicable to this project. So question 30 asks, which of the following greenhouse gas thresholds is applicable to this project? So if we think about this project, it's in Los Osos, which means it's in the county. And the county doesn't have a qualified climate action plan. So unfortunately, you can't do A. And C here, as far as we know, the county doesn't have adopted defensible greenhouse gas thresholds, and either does the air district. So your options right now is no net increase. So I can highlight that there. For the most defensible option is no net increase. And so this question 31 asks you to arrange the following mitigation hierarchy options into the recommended order according to the APCD. And if you remember in the slideshow, I said that you should start local and then go outwards. So really, we're looking for on-site greenhouse gas emissions first. And then we're looking at next go to SLO County on-site, off-site, and offsets. And then we would look to go to California. And then we would look to go to North American generated offsets, and then international offsets. So that's just like a question to remind yourself that if offsets are available, try to stay local and then move outwards. And then question 32, what resources are available for you for on-site mitigation measures. The interim greenhouse gas guidance document talks about our table 3-5, which we've had forever, and it still has some great mitigation measures in there. A good option again is the 2010 CAPCOA quantifying and greenhouse gas mitigation measures document. This 2010 document is actually currently being updated by the SAC Metro Air Quality District under an SB1 adaptation planning grant. So you will very soon see a very new document which has a lot of mitigation measures that are actually quantifiable, which is something that the greenhouse gas side has really missed. So we're really excited for that document. And then there's also the 2017 scoping plan, has an Appendix B, which includes examples of on-site project design features. And then there are also VMT measures found in the 2018 Office of Planning and Research, Technical Advisory on Evaluating Transportation Impacts, because, you know, VMT measures reduce VMT, but they also can reduce GHG. So you kind of have a 2-for-1 there. So I kind of gave you the answer to this question already. It's all of the above. And now we're on the last section, which is great. We're doing great with timing. Question B, and this is where I was talking about less straightforward. This isn't really the math side of, there isn't a lot of math in question B. So, you know, this is where your writing skills come in. So it asks you, does the project conflict with an applicable plan, policy, or regulation adopted for the purpose of reducing emissions of greenhouse gases? And this is the dropdown that would help you out. And so for this exercise, we actually don't have answers to questions 33 through 35 because they would require quite a bit of analysis, and we're not experts in all of your plans. So this is really a question that is best answered by you planners. So question 33 asks, does this project conflict with any locally adopted climate action plans, sustainability plan, adaptation plans, general plans, or any other plans, policies, or regulations designed to reduce greenhouse gas emissions? Question 34 asks, does this project conflict with the land use and transportation policies, goals, or action strategies and preferred growth scenario identified in SLOCOG's RTP and SCS? And so that would be really, SLOCOG would be the expert in that. And we do have a tip for you here. In the fall, SLOCOG will be updating the action strategies for the 2023 RTP, and a consistency checklist will be created. Until then, it's best to work with SLOCOG early in the project development process to understand if projects are consistent with the information in the 2019 RTP. And then lastly, does the project conflict with any components within California's 2017 climate change scoping plan? And again, you know, a checklist here would be great. And I think, Andy, if I'm not mistaken, that the Bay Area said they were working on a consistency checklist.
That's right. So OPR has already provided some guidance on this, the Office of Planning and Research from the state. But our understanding is the Bay Area is currently working on developing a little bit more detailed understanding of that consistency analysis. And when that does become available, we'll make sure we have that as a resource for you all.
Yeah. And so that's the end of the activity. We're going to be posting this on our website so you all can, you know, use this when you're evaluating your projects. And of course, we'll have this recording too. So I think now we can just open up to questions because we have 20 minutes left.
Looks like we have a question from Katie. Katie, do you want to bring that question up for us and we can see if we can answer that?
I was just back on the air quality question. Letter D seems to be analyzing the impacts of the the nuisances that would be located nearby. That seems to be analyzing the existing environment on the project and not the project on the environment. I had the impression that there's some case law that says that that's not how CEQA is meant to be used, and so just wanted some clarification on that.
Yeah, that's a pretty good question. I actually never really thought of that for question D. The checklist is created by the Association of Environmental Professionals, and I think they base it off of the CEQA guidelines. So, you know, I'm not really sure where that, how that question kind of got in there, because yeah, you're right. It does seem like it's a reverse CEQA a little bit.
Yeah, that's a great question, Katie. I think that's worth us going back to AEP as the air district and seeing if they can help us get some clarification on that. So thanks for bringing that up.
That question could be applicable if the project you're looking at, it would be generating odors or emissions. And I think that's, so instead of looking to see if you've got any odor producing in a radius of a mile or emissions, you'd be looking at whether the project would be emitting odors and do you have any sensitive receptors within a mile?
And that was how I had used it in the past, but anyway, the explanation today was kind of going the opposite, so thank you.
I agree, yeah.
Yeah, I think you're right. That table that we have is really looking at, you know, if you have a facility that matches this description that's going in, how far away might there be impacts odor-wise, and do you have residences that are close? So thanks. That's I think you're right, Steve. That's a better clarification on where that sits. I don't think we need to actually ask AEP on that. All right. Are there any other questions that we have today? I know we've gone through quite a bit, but we've been working really diligently here to give you all tools that can help answer the checklist questions, both those 4 air quality checklist questions and the 2 greenhouse gas checklist questions. So please dive into the website that we have and look at those tools and get yourself familiar with them. And we'll be doing, like I said, we'll be doing the same kind of training for the consultants which do a lot of this work on the projects as well. So. If we don't have other questions, we'll go ahead and, you know, we're a little bit early, so we can close up shop a little early for you today. Thank you very much for your attention and for your good work out there. And if you have any questions that come up afterwards, feel free to give us a call or send us an email. We're happy to be here and answer any questions for you.
Thank you for presenting this, making it available to us.
You're very welcome.
Providing kind of step by step, going over that, Jackie, that was really helpful. And also Vince and Andy, thanks for all the work.
So with that, we'll close up.
Thank you.
Thank you.